Hey guys, tonight we slip into something considerably less comfortable than pajamas. A corset-tight, ink-smudged world of etiquette, affection, and barely concealed gossip. Imagine yourself stepping softly across creaky floorboards into a Victorian drawing room lit by flickering gaslight. The air smells like rosewater, melted sealing wax, and whatever blend of cologne was popular before personal space was invented. You sit at a carved oak desk, uncork your inkwell, and pick up your favorite quill. The paper before you is thick-textured and absurdly intimidating. Somewhere outside, a horse-drawn carriage rattles by and inside your chest. Your heart thumps like a metronome because you're about to write a letter. And in the 19th century, that's basically emotional skydiving. You probably won't survive this if you overthink your comma placement. Or worse, run out of sealing wax halfway through a dramatic pause. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lift your pen. And suddenly, you're not just a person with a nice desk. You're a participant in a centuries-old ritual that turns ink and paper into magic. In Victorian times, letter writing isn't just communication. It's performance therapy, flirting, and the purest form of passive-aggressive warfare, all in one envelope. Let's begin with the setup. Your station is crucial. A proper escritoire or writing desk is expected. Preferably mahogany, maybe walnut with a velvet blotter, a matching pen tray, and a small drawer for secrets or postage stamps depending on your lifestyle. Your ink is dark, possibly scented. Your paper cream or dove gray, no lines, no distractions. And your handwriting cursive so refined it could curtsy. Victorian England, mid-1800s. The letter is king. There are no phones, no emails, no group chats. If you want to tell someone you're in love, or you're heartbroken, or that their casserole was interesting, you write. Carefully, thoughtfully, and above all, beautifully. Mainstream historical fact. The average upper-middle-class Victorian might write and receive several letters a day. Letter writing wasn't just a habit. It was a social necessity. And it was expected that you replied to every letter within 2 to 3 days, unless you wanted to be gently exiled from society or immortalized in someone's diary as that rude cousin. You reach for your quill pen, which has already stained your fingertips despite your best efforts. Victorian pens are usually goose feathers, trimmed to a sharp point. You dip into the ink slowly, because too fast and it'll blot. Too slow and it dries. It's like making espresso with no machine and twice the social stakes. There's a quiet joy in the ritual. The scratch of nib on paper. The slow formation of each looped letter. You write with intention, because crossing things out is frowned upon. That would suggest imperfection, a thought unworthy of permanence. Some households had entire manuals on epistolary etiquette. You'd learn how to begin, "Dear Sir, my dearest cousin, honored Miss Eliza." You'd learn how to end yours most affectionately, with the utmost respect, faithfully yours if you're in a weird mood. And you'd learn that underlining something twice could be considered positively scandalous. Of course, writing isn't all rules and regency. Sometimes you just let yourself drift. You describe the weather, the lunch you barely tolerated, the neighbor who installed a fountain that gurgles judgmentally. You ramble, but artfully. Victorian letter writing wasn't just words, it was craft. Think of it like building an emotional origami swan. Each fold matters. Each line balances between honesty and social acrobatics. Fringe tidbit. Some particularly dramatic Victorians used invisible ink, usually lemon juice, on top of the visible writing. The recipient would have to heat the letter gently over a lamp to read the secret message. A risky maneuver if you're clumsy or emotionally unstable. I love you. Also, this paper is now on fire. Your hand aches after a few paragraphs. That's normal and satisfying. No one in this era finishes a letter without earning it. You pause to sprinkle blotting sand over the ink because waiting for it to dry naturally is for peasants and children. You tip the paper gently, watching the grains pick up the wet gloss and dull it just enough to seal the moment in time. Then the fold. Not just any fold, there are techniques. Some fold left to right, others into thirds, some diagonally if they're feeling flirty. The way you fold a letter can say more than what's inside. Just like the wax seal you'll press on top. We'll get to wax later, of course. That's its own drama. Historians still argue whether the rise of the postal system truly democratized emotional expression or just gave shy people a more attractive form of procrastination. But one thing's clear, letters allowed people to be bold in ink where they could never be in person. You sit back. Letter complete. Words inked. Secrets sealed. You've said something tonight. Something real. And the best part, that the story's just begun. You place your letter carefully beside the inkwell, but something's missing. A rectangle. Tiny. Revolutionary. Sticky on one side and socially explosive on the other. It's time for the penny black. You hold it between two fingers, a tiny black square, Queen Victoria's solemn profile, stamped front and center. It's unassuming. But in 1840, this small adhesive square blew the hinges off the door of British communication. Before the penny black postage was complicated. Rates were calculated by distance weight, and believe it or not, how many pieces of paper you dared to include. If you were unlucky, the recipient might have to pay to even open your heartfelt message. Which meant some people got creative. A knock on the door, a glance at the handwriting, and no thank you, I know what he means, before refusing delivery. Imagine ghosting someone with postage. Then Sir Rowland Hill entered the chat, not with a meme, but with a proposal so radical it made Victorian bureaucrats clutch their waistcoats, one price, one stamp, anywhere in the UK. Just a penny. Cue gasps. Cue arguments. Cue Queen Victoria agreeing to let her face be immortalized in monochrome on history's first prepaid postage stamp. Historians still argue whether the penny black truly democratized letter writing or just expanded middle-class guilt. Either way, you now live in a world where a single coin can send your words from the misty streets of York to the cliffs of Dover without drama. You reach for your own penny black, well, a replica. Unless you've got a real one, in which case, congrats, you're holding a collector's dream. Even back then, these stamps were small marvels, engraved with precision. Printed on unperforated sheets, you had to cut yourself with scissors, which honestly feels like a trap for anyone under-caffeinated. Postage wasn't just a fee, it became a gesture. You sending a stamped letter. That's generosity. That's love. That's a commitment to not burdening your cousin Charlotte with surprise postal charges during her headache season. You lick the back of the stamp. The taste slightly bitter, faintly chemical, possibly poisonous by today's standards. You press it to the upper right corner of your envelope, smooth it gently, and marvel at how it transforms everything. Suddenly, your folded, sealed thought is on the move. A bird with a direction. A whisper with wheels. Then comes the postmark. In 1840s Britain, the penny black was famously paired with a red cancellation mark. Bright scarlet ink splashed in a crisscross pattern to ensure no one reused the stamp. People being people, of course, tried to remove the red marks. So later versions used black ink instead, which matched the stamp a little too well. Victorians ever fans of overcorrection, quirky detail. The Penny Black's creator originally wanted the Queen's portrait to age as new editions were printed. But Victoria refused. Her profile remained fixed forever, youthful, forever unimpressed. The ultimate Victorian move. Now postboxes start to appear, not just at post offices, but on street corners. Bright red and ready. Sir Anthony Trollope, novelist and post office official, helped design the first freestanding pillar box. His two passions, literature and mail. A combo that basically describes everyone in the Victorian era. You step outside with your letter in hand. The air is brisk, the cobblestones uneven, and somewhere someone is selling questionable meat pies. But your feet know where they're going to the nearest post box. It stands like a beacon, red and slightly chipped, next to a wrought iron fence with more rust than confidence. You drop your letter in. There's a soft clink, and then it's gone. On its way, probably via a mail coach, or if you're lucky, a rail line. The expansion of the railway system meant letters that once took days could now arrive in hours. This wasn't just fast, it was addictive. People started expecting responses within the same week. An early version of seen at 10:04 a.m. But with every advancement comes tension. Some critics worried that easy postage would lead to frivolous communication, that women in particular might write too often, too openly, too romantically. Gasp, others feared that anonymity would encourage scandal, which, spoiler alert, we'll definitely get to later. For now, you return home lighter. Your thoughts have been sent, your words posted. Somewhere, a sorting clerk will read your recipient's name aloud in a candlelit room full of envelopes and sighs. Somewhere, a horse will clop steadily through foggy streets, carrying stories, recipes, complaints about the weather. Back in your sitting room, you stare at the writing desk. Empty now, waiting. Because in Victorian life, one letter begets another, and another, and another. And with every stamp you affix, every envelope you seal, you're not just sending words, you're sending yourself. You walk back into your writing room and pause at the edge of the desk, letting your fingers brush the stack of paper waiting patiently beside the inkwell. It's not just any paper. It's thick, creamy, and just the right shade of pale ivory to flatter your handwriting. There's a faint scent rising from the stack, lavender maybe, or possibly violet. A note left behind not by you, but by the stationer who understood that paper isn't just for words. It's for impression. Victorian stationery was an art form. It had to be. You didn't have Instagram profile pictures or a curated grid to make your point. All people had was your paper, your ink, and maybe a whiff of who you thought you were. You lift the first sheet. Feel it. The texture lightly ribbed so the ink settles like silk on linen. The weight substantial enough to feel important. Because if your letter fluttered like tissue in the reader's hands, so too might your reputation. Paper in the Victorian world was deeply coded. A gentleman wrote on crisp, unadorned white. Ladies often preferred pastel tints, powder blue, soft blush, pale lilac, each color suggesting something slightly different. Blue hinted at cool wit, pink affection, lilac possibly mourning or just excellent taste. Fringe tidbit, some fashionable circles swore by scented paper perfumed lightly with oils or sachet-lined drawers. Rosewater was popular, orange blossom exotic. And while historians still argue whether it helped or hindered romantic intentions, everyone agrees that opening a letter scented with jasmine was like being flirted with by paper. Your pen hovers, but wait, you reach for your envelope instead. Yes, you're going out of order. Welcome to the subtle tyranny of Victorian envelope culture. You see how you folded and enclosed your message mattered just as much as what it said. Envelopes were only just becoming standard. Before that, you folded the letter itself into its own cover like an origami secret. But now, purpose-built envelopes are all the rage, and they come with their own set of expectations. The paper must match. Always. Woe unto the poor soul who pairs white paper with ivory envelope. It's the 19th century version of wearing black shoes with brown pants. Not illegal, but close. You select an envelope with a thin gold border, elegant, but not ostentatious. You resist the urge to monogram it. That would be fine for a thank you note, but today's letter is personal. You fold your page once neatly and slide it inside. A small thrill. It's almost like tucking away part of your soul. Before sealing, you dab the flap with a little scented water. Not enough to overpower, just enough to say, yes, this came from me. One scholar once claimed Victorian women used this scent cue to leave clues about their identity during courtship. Historians still argue whether it was intentional or just overactive imagination wrapped in rose water. Back at your desk, you examine your tools. Your stationery set includes matching notepaper envelopes and possibly even visiting cards, each tucked into a velvet-lined box that closes with a satisfying click. Some even come with a hidden compartment for pressed flowers or sentimental ribbons, because if you're going to faint dramatically onto a chaise lounge, at least leave behind something delicate. You glance at a pile of older letters beside the box, your own correspondence tied with silk ribbon. Some are soft from rereading. One still smells faintly of bergamot. It's amazing how paper can hold a memory long after the ink has faded. Time for a new sheet. This one a little smaller for a quicker note. Perhaps to a friend or an aunt or someone who's just returned from bath with a suspicious tan and several stories you're desperate to hear. You begin, my dearest, then pause. Should it be dear, dearest, most beloved Victorians agonized over their openings? The wrong tone could send the wrong message, and the right tone could accidentally start an engagement. You settle for dearest Clara, because Clara will forgive you if you over-emote. Probably. Ink flows. You tell her about the weather, your mother's tendency to rearrange the parlor when she's anxious, and how the neighbor's peacock has once again escaped into your rose garden. It's casual warm, and just flirtatious enough to keep Clara curious. Your pen scratches pleasantly across the paper. The act of writing, of shaping thoughts into loops and flourishes, feels meditative, like breathing with your fingers. Quirky detail. Some fashionable circles once believed that the pressure of your pen revealed your personality. A light touch meant you were dreamy. A heavy hand meant you were intense. A consistent slant, likely well married. An erratic style. Perhaps you'd read too many novels. No judgment, just observation. As you finish, you sit back and fan the ink gently. Not too much, not too close. You don't want smudges. Or worse, the dreaded ink blot, that inky explosion of social doom. A single blot might mean rewriting the entire letter, or pretending it was intentional. A raven landed nearby. So sorry. You seal the envelope, press it shut, and admire your work. There's satisfaction here, not just in the message, but in the process. In this world, paper speaks. It announces your mood, your status, your intent, and sometimes your secrets. You set it aside, ready to stamp and seal, and already your fingers itch to write another. You sit again this time, not to write, but to observe. Across the room, lit by the glow of a late morning sun, filtered through lace curtains, is a scene as commonplace in Victorian parlors as the tea tray or the perpetual argument about what counts as proper morning attire. A woman, young, poised, ink-stained, bends over her escritoire. Her brows knit not with frustration, but precision. This is her moment, and you know better than to interrupt. Victorian women and letter writing were quite simply inseparable. More than etiquette, more than hobby, it was a mode of expression, a space of autonomy, and when needed, a weapon sharper than any dueling pistol. You watch as she opens her lacquered writing box. It smells faintly of cedar and rosewood. Inside ivory paper, a mother-of-pearl penknife for trimming quills, and a small ceramic dish of blotting sand. The accoutrements of polite warfare. She begins her letter. You inch closer, figuratively, of course. Don't intrude. Just watch how the words build. Each loop of the pen is intentional. Each phrase walks the line between affection and subtle domination. She's not just writing to inform. She's writing to control the narrative. This is the unsung power of Victorian correspondence, the letter as social maneuver. Especially for women whose voices were often confined to salons, drawing rooms, and supervised conversations. On paper, they could be bold, witty, vulnerable. And they were. You notice the way she pauses after writing Dear Miss Worthing. A decision point. Too familiar, too cold. Letter writing manuals of the day, where clear address dictates everything. You do not dear a woman above you in status unless she's family. And you never use my in writing to a man unless you're trying to be scandalous or married. She continues her script, a flawless cascade of inked intentions. And here's the fringe tidbit. Some women practiced penmanship the way others practiced piano daily, obsessively competitively. Letter writing was often the only acceptable form of extended intellectual display. A young lady might not be allowed to publish, but she could deliver prose that would make a Shakespearean jealous, all wrapped in lilac-scented paper and impeccable margins. Victorian society noticed. Letters were read, reread, passed around. Excerpts memorized, tone dissected. Entire social uprisings could begin with a single. I trust you are well, though I have reason to believe otherwise. You remember a historical anecdote, a pair of sisters who developed their own private code within their letters. Certain phrases meant he's insufferable, others, he's interested, and one particularly cryptic phrase. The laundry is late meant mother suspects everything. Burn this letter. Historians still argue whether women's letter writing in this era was a subversion of imposed silence or an extension of it, a way to conform while subtly pushing back. But the truth may be that it was both. Resistance in cursive, a revolution in cotton paper. Your letter writer pauses again. She opens a drawer and pulls out a small folded square, another letter. Older, creased from handling, the ink faint now like breath fading into time. She reads, smiles slightly, then with great care tucks it into a hidden compartment in her writing desk. Words preserved like pressed violets. You glance around the room and realize this ritual is not unique to her. Her sister keeps letters tied with green silk in a box labeled recipes that contains not a single dish. Her mother uses her letters to practice French scribbling translations in the margins. Even the housemaid receives folded slips from the butcher's apprentice. Paper, you see, doesn't care for class boundaries. Once written, it travels as an equal. One quirky example, Queen Victoria herself was a prolific letter writer, averaging several thousand letters per year. She sent notes to her ministers, her children, her late husband's portrait. Yes, she wrote letters to the dead. She found comfort in it. Maybe you would too. You look back at the woman writing now. She signs her name, just her initials, nothing more. And yet, everything. There's a power in that choice. An invitation to interpret, to wonder, to read between the folds. She sprinkles sand to blot. Then, in a quiet flourish, folds the paper inward and seals it with a neat dab of wax, pressing her seal, a tiny thistle, into the still soft surface. It hisses faintly as it hardens. The letter is done. But you know it isn't. Because what she's really done is send a thought across space. A feeling frozen in ink. A version of herself offered bravely and beautifully. She rises, crosses the room, places the letter gently into the hallway basket for the afternoon collection. And just like that, her voice leaves the room, to be carried by boots, wheels, horses, and rail lines. But here's what's lovely. Her thoughts will arrive intact. Her words unblurred by time or tone. The reader will unfold them with fingers she's never touched, and yet for one moment they'll meet. All because of a letter. The gentleman across the room clears his throat. Not in a someone bring me tea kind of way, but in the way a man does when he's about to undertake something that requires equal parts precision pride and practiced restraint. He pulls out a chair, carved oak leather cushion practical, and sits at his writing desk. You notice immediately everything here is different. The stationery is bone white. The edges sharp clean, utterly unfrilled. No pastel flourishes, no faint scent of bergamot. The pen, a metal nib stiffer than its goose-feathered cousin, rests beside a small bottle of ink, unadorned black as a funeral coat. Welcome to the masculine side of Victorian letter writing. You watch as he begins. His fingers move with less flair but more pressure. His script is compact, deliberate, leaning forward like it has somewhere to be. Italics, those neat, right slanting lines, are the gentleman's calling card. Anything else risks looking too romantic, too feminine, or worst of all, French. Penmanship for a man in Victorian England is a performance of identity. Clear, legible writing isn't just practical, it's moral. Sloppy script suggests a sloppy mind, or heaven forbid, radical ideas. Mainstream fact schools taught boys and girls entirely different handwriting systems. Boys were encouraged to write upright or slightly italic, with uniform spacing and minimal loops. Girls, meanwhile, were trained to embrace elegance curvature and the art of embedding character into curvature. But the gentleman before you, his pen has a mission. You glance over his shoulder, not to snoop, okay, maybe a little, but to observe the tone. He's writing to his solicitor. The phrasing is formal, but under the surface you catch glimpses of annoyance in regard to the ongoing delay, followed by an aggressively underlined twice agreed upon terms. He dots his I's with militaristic precision and crosses his T's like he's fencing. No hearts, no flourishes. Just controlled fury in copperplate form. Historians still argue whether this stiff male style was a rejection of sentiment or simply a reflection of societal expectation. But what's undeniable is that men too had their coded ways of softening or sharpening their messages. Take, for instance, margin width. If a man wrote with extra wide margins, he might be showing deference. Narrow margins, efficiency, or passive aggression, or both. And punctuation, an art. Too many commas, hesitation. Too few rushed. One well-placed semicolon in the Victorian man's letter might signal deep thought or just a fear of appearing too emotional. No exclamation points, ever. Unless you're declaring someone dead, or perhaps mildly surprised by a tax adjustment. Quirky tidbit. Some gentlemen had custom handwriting tutors paid hourly to correct every slouch, every accidental flourish. Charles Dickens obsessed with maintaining a professional, firm style. Oscar Wilde. His letters were so dramatic and illegible, some recipients thought they were abstract art. And Lord Byron wrote in looping romantic prose so ornate, it looked like the letter had been penned by a lovesick violin. Back at the desk, our gentleman finishes his solicitor letter. But he's not done. Now comes the real challenge, a note to his sister. His tone softens slightly. The slant of the text relaxes. Still italic, still formal, but the edges blur. He opens with, "My dear Marianne," and you see it just for a second. A pause, a smile. He dips his pen again. This is how men in the Victorian world could say what they dared not speak. "I miss you" becomes, "I hope your health remains robust amid the winter chill." "I'm worried" becomes, "Do not overexert yourself, I implore you." Feelings folded in between metaphors and weather updates. He tells her the roses at home have bloomed early, that the neighbor's dog has finally stopped barking, and that he sent along the latest edition of the London Illustrated. And then quietly, "Father has been quieter than usual. I think you'd know what to say." That line lingers. He signs not love, not yours affectionately, but simply ever your brother. It's soft, unassuming, and deeply personal. He seals the envelope with dark green wax masculine understated and presses in a seal. His initials THM, no crest, no emblem, just identity clean and pressed. As he places it gently into the post tray, you wonder how many such letters traveled through the Victorian postal system, stoic on the surface, stormy underneath. Gentlemen may have been expected to keep a stiff upper lip, but on a paper they whispered. They hoped. They mourned. And sometimes they fell in love with their own restraint. The knock at the door is soft, barely there, but it sends a ripple through the entire household. Chairs shift. Teacups pause midair. The maid appears out of nowhere like a trained hawk gliding down the corridor toward the sound. You remain still waiting. Then it comes again. Louder. 2 precise raps. You know what that means. The postman. You move to the window, not hurried, of course, but not exactly slow either, and peek through the lace curtain. There he is in full regalia, navy blue coat, brass buttons, polished to military sheen satchel, slung with the easy authority of a man who knows he's the most anticipated arrival on the street. Victorian postmen weren't just couriers. They were minor celebrities, threaded into the daily routine like bread deliveries and unsolicited piano solos. In a world without texts or alerts or unscheduled calls, the arrival of the post was the closest thing to drama you could hope for on a Tuesday. He tips his cap to the maid, who smiles back, maybe too long, and reaches into his bag. Mainstream fact, by the mid-19th century, the British postal system was astonishingly efficient. Thanks to the rapid expansion of the railways and the introduction of regional sorting hubs, many towns received up to 12 postal deliveries per day. Yes, 12. It was entirely possible to write a letter in the morning, receive a reply by dinner time, and still have energy left to complain about it in your diary. The maid hands you your letter bundle with just a hint of ceremony. It's warm from his satchel. The envelope stacked like a pastry tower of social engagement bear names in every imaginable script. One with a wax seal, one with smudged ink, one with the unmistakable signature of your aunt who insists on writing in pencil for reasons no one understands. And with the mail, a sigh. That quiet breath people took in Victorian times when faced with other people's thoughts. Who would it be today? A cousin with an update about her cat's scandalous escapades, a publisher responding to your unsolicited sonnets. Or worse, a reply from someone who took too long to answer, giving you ample time to invent at least 3 imaginary betrayals. You sit and begin to open them. First, the wax-sealed one. You slide a knife gently under the flap and peel it back with the delicacy of someone disarming a trap. Inside, 2 pages folded crisply, the handwriting angular and precise. You scan quickly for tone warm, informative, no insults hidden in between the lines. A success. Quirky detail. There was once a pamphlet circulated among the upper middle class titled, How to read a letter without misreading the intention. It advised readers to first inhale the scent, then read the closing line, then the opening, and only then the body. A bizarre ritual, but one many followed. Historians still argue whether this was genuine etiquette or the equivalent of a Victorian inbox hack. The second letter is thicker. 3 pages. The penmanship loops dramatically. It's from your cousin, obviously. She can't help herself. She writes about everything: the hens, the hats, the neighbor's failed romantic overture involving a broken violin string. It's a riot of triviality, but you love every second of it. And then the third. This one is thinner, shorter. Your name scrawled with haste. No seal, no scent, no flourish. Inside, the matter is now beyond our hands. Say nothing more. Your stomach flips, not because of what it says, but because of how little it says. Letters in the Victorian age didn't need to be long to ruin your day. Sometimes, a single sentence could unravel an entire week. You tuck it away, out of sight. You'll decide later whether to burn it, keep it, or send a reply so passive-aggressive it requires a second envelope just to contain the subtext. But even in that moment of emotional weather, you remember the postman will be back. Twice more today. And each time he might bring joy, heartbreak, a bill, or a poem. He is the thread between the private and the public. The final link between ink and emotion. He is no exaggeration, the most powerful man you know. You glance at the clock. Almost time for the evening delivery. You return to your writing desk, suddenly unsure if your earlier note to Marianne conveyed just the right tone. Too much sympathy, too little. You consider penning a follow-up, something breezier, less weighted. More, by the way, and less here lies my soul. The door knocks again. Twice. Of course. You rise with the dignity of someone who's already imagined 3 different replies. Because that's the thing about Victorian letter writing, you're never really done. Not when there's ink left in the bottle. Not when the postman still walks the street. Not when words folded, stamped, and sealed keep traveling faster than the feelings they carry. The sealing wax is warm in your palm. You roll it gently between your fingers like a talisman, like the entire fate of your words depends on this one soft, glossy stick of crimson wax, and in some ways it does. The fire flickers. You tilt the stick over the candle's flame, and slowly, patiently, the wax begins to melt. It drips in thick, syrupy beads onto the envelope flap you've already folded with care. The scent is faintly resinous, slightly metallic, ancient. And just as the last drop lands, you press your seal into it, a firm, confident movement. Click. The wax hardens with a hiss. The moment is perfect. The Victorians didn't seal letters just to prevent tampering. They sealed them because drama was required. A letter wasn't complete without its flourish, a swirl of melted wax pressed with a crest. A cipher or a symbol so obscure it could be anything from your family motto to a hedgehog pun only 3 people understood. Mainstream historical fact sealing wax was essential before envelopes had gummed flaps, and even after those existed, many people still preferred the ceremonial quality of a wax seal. It was identity security style and a tiny bit of espionage, all in one splatter. The color you chose mattered too. Red was traditional, respectable, often used for official or familial business. Black, as you might guess, was reserved for mourning. Green could signal friendship or whimsy. Blue, romantic interest. Lavender, a little mysterious. White rare, delicate, usually associated with invitations, christenings, or the kind of letter that arrives smelling suspiciously like lilies. Quirky detail. Some daring correspondents used dual-color waxes swirling 2 hues together to create a marbled effect. It wasn't exactly sanctioned by Emily Post, but it was a flex. And if your seal cracked in transit, oh scandal. What if someone peeked? What if the postman, dear trusted postman, read your letter aloud while sipping tea in the sorting office? It happened more than you'd think. Victorians were obsessed with secrecy and codes, especially in the upper classes. That's why some letters, even when sealed, contained hidden meanings. You fold your latest letter to a dear friend ostensibly, and remember to include a few hints. A tiny pressed fern which she'll recognize from your visit to Bath. The phrase "our little confidant" remains in the cupboard, which you both know refers not to furniture, but to the neighbor's overactive tendency to eavesdrop. There's a whole language beneath the ink. One example, the use of pinpricks. Women occasionally used a straight pin to subtly mark letters in certain places, small dots in the upper corner, or by a specific word. It might mean, "read in private," or "this part is a lie," or "my mother is looking over my shoulder." Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice, or just a few clever girls in Gloucestershire who started a trend. And then, of course, there are cipher wheels. Tucked away in a few Victorian stationery boxes were coded discs, simple letter substitution tools that allowed friends, lovers, or amateur detectives to encode short phrases. Nothing fancy, nothing MI6, but enough to turn "I long to see you" into B MPQ versus UG AQW, which frankly only works if your beloved is both invested and good at puzzles. You glance at your envelope again. The seal is perfect, your family crest, yes, but subtly rotated. Just enough to mean something to the recipient. Just enough to make them wonder, was that a mistake or a message? You prepare another letter. This one more delicate. A note to someone far less safe. Your heart flutters just slightly as you begin. You choose a different wax, deep blue, almost purple. The color of dusk. The seal A, rose pressed into place with deliberate precision. You don't sign this one with your name. You sign with a single initial, because even secrets want a return address. Then comes folding. Victorian letters, especially among women, were folded in various styles, some as straightforward as a business invoice, others as complex as a miniature origami swan. There were even instructional pamphlets, 7 discrete folds for every occasion. A square fold might mean friendship. A diagonal one, affection. A completely sealed fold with no separate envelope at all that was either economical or deeply intimate. You try one of the more elaborate folds now. It feels like writing with your hands, even after the ink is dry. And then, just for fun, you tuck a sliver of lavender paper inside. Blank. No message. Just scent. Just wait. Just suggestion. Your letters are piling up now, each sealed like a secret waiting to breathe. You light more candles. You open your wax tin. You reheat the seal, cleaning the residue of the last impression with a velvet cloth. You're not just corresponding. You're curating a language of fire and emblem. And as each seal cools, you know the recipient will run their finger over it. Wonder what mood you were in, what candle you used, whether the tilt was intentional. They'll break it reluctantly, lovingly, suspiciously. They'll unfold the letter like a spell, and maybe if you've done your work well, they won't even notice the ink trembled just slightly near the part that mattered most. Your fingertips hover over the envelope, not quite ready to release it into the world. Something about the moment feels unsteady. Not because of what you wrote, but because you know what comes next: scrutiny. Not from the recipient necessarily, but from everyone else it might pass through first. Welcome to the treacherous world of postal etiquette. You've already written the letter. You've chosen your paper, carefully trimmed your nib, and sealed the envelope like a seasoned spy. But you're not finished, not by a long shot. Because this is the Victorian age, and sending a letter is the beginning of a delicate social ballet. First things first, address placement. The recipient's name must go on the front, centered slightly above the midline. Not too far to the right, that's eccentric, and never too high, you're not writing to a bird. And it must be legible, clear, flowing script, preferably in black ink. Sepia is acceptable if you're in mourning. Blue risky. Red, absolutely not. Red ink was for angry teachers' anonymous threats and sometimes blood. No one wants to receive any of those by post. Then honorifics. A woman of uncertain marital status, Miss if young Mrs. If known to be married, but heaven help you if you assume. If unsure, Victorian wisdom suggests you inquire discreetly, or use a first name only if you're prepared to deal with the consequences. You write Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, number 14, Brook Street, Bristol, and immediately second-guess your line spacing. This is what the Victorians were best at, overthinking the margins. Whole books were published on proper layout, envelope etiquette, how to fold without creating vulgar bulges, and what direction the flap should face when handed to a servant. Spoiler pointed downward. Always. Unless you're including cash, in which case all rules dissolve in the face of coinage. You pause. You consider your blotting technique. You used sand earlier, which is traditional, but there's a new blotting paper you've been meaning to try, lavender-hued, supposedly faster drying. But some say it leaves a faint grain on the ink. And what if your recipient notices? Historians still argue whether these tiny choices were genuine acts of communication or simply manifestations of Victorian social anxiety. Possibly both. After all, what is more delightfully passive-aggressive than crafting a letter so perfectly it intimidates the person receiving it? And speaking of perfection, what if your ink blotted mid-sentence, a single splotch, a tremor of distraction, a sneeze, a cat? It doesn't matter. That smudge now lives forever between I remain and yours devotedly, and it might change everything. Some writers scraped ink from the page with a penknife, carefully lifting the stain without tearing the fibers. Others rewrote the letter entirely, often multiple times, until they had an unblemished version to send. In fact, it's estimated that many Victorian letters were the second or third draft. Each copy a little tighter, a little colder, a little more distant from the original pulse. You glance at the letter you've just sealed. You think it's fine? Probably. But one line might come off too strong, and that comma was it too personal. You are now deeply entangled in the most Victorian emotion of all correspondence, regret. Which brings us to punctuation. 1 exclamation mark, delightful. 2, dubious. 3, deranged. A period at the end of a casual greeting, practically a death sentence. You remember an anecdote of a woman who received a letter ending in sincerely. Nothing more. No comma. No name. No punctuation. Just the word floating, unanchored. She fainted on the spot. Or so the story goes. Quirky fact, some etiquette guide suggested testing your letter by reading it aloud in front of a mirror. If you felt even a flicker of embarrassment, the letter was too emotional. If your reflection smirked, it was too clever. If you wept, you were banned from the postal system until your next birthday. You prepare to walk the letter to the box. But wait, you hesitate. Should you send this today? Victorians believed the day your letter was sent mattered. Mondays were for business. Tuesdays for courtship. Fridays slightly reckless. Sunday post was rare. Blessedly, mercifully rare. But if someone did send you something on a Sunday, it usually meant guilt. Or desperation. You sigh and check the calendar. It's Thursday. That'll do. Still, you hover at the door, letter in hand. Because once you send it, it's out there. No taking it back. No unsending. No calling it a draft. Just a wax-sealed version of your better judgment barreling towards someone else's tea table. You finally open the door. The street is quiet cobbled sleepy. Somewhere, a bird calls faint and unimpressed. You walk the few steps to the nearest post box. The brass handle gleams. The opening waits. You hesitate one last time. Then in it goes. Gone. You walk back slowly, already revising the next one in your head. Because in the Victorian world, perfect letters don't exist, only better ones. You don't expect the letter to arrive today, but it does. Slipped beneath your door sometime between the third tea refill and the moment you contemplated dusting your bookshelf again just to feel in control. The envelope is thick, pale blue, edged in silver, folded so precisely you're tempted not to open it out of sheer reverence. But of course you do. Inside one page, not even full. Just 10 lines, every one of them achingly deliberate. It begins with, "You linger more often than I admit." And there it is. A Victorian love letter. Sudden heat flushes through you, not from scandal yet, but from the realization that in the world of corsets and cravats, this is practically emotional nudity. Because expressing affection, real pulsing, unambiguous feeling in writing, was both common and wildly dangerous in the 19th century. Especially when done well. Victorian society prized restraint, and yet love letters were everywhere, behind lace curtains in coat pockets, buried in desk drawers tied with blue ribbon. The contradiction was thrilling and utterly exhausting. Mainstream historical fact, courtship by correspondence, was considered not only acceptable, but in many cases preferable. It offered emotional intimacy without the impropriety of prolonged physical presence. You could declare your heart from a safe distance and avoid the awkwardness of accidentally fainting on someone's lap. That said, there were rules. Rule number 1, don't be obvious. "You have been in my thoughts" is acceptable. "I dream of you constantly" is questionable. "Your smile haunts me across the breakfast table" is a cry for help. Victorian love was coded careful and carefully coded. You flip the letter over. The writer signed only with a single initial J and used dark green wax to seal it slightly smeared. Intimate, but not sloppy. Just the right degree of swoon, the tone just cryptic enough to pass for polite. But you know the truth. That line about the roses blooming too early, absolutely about you. That mention of restless nights, practically a sonnet in disguise. Historians still argue whether Victorian love letters were genuinely romantic or simply rehearsed exercises in emotional gymnastics. But either way, the result was the same feeling. Deep, electric, barely contained affection, hidden in full view. You return to your desk and reach for your own pale blue paper. Suddenly, the scent of lavender feels too direct. You swap it for clean, unscented cream stock. Just enough texture to feel expensive, not enough to feel intentional. You begin. "I believe we are both aware of the unspoken, and so I write instead, there." That says nothing and everything. You pause to sip your tea, now lukewarm. Because writing a love letter Victorian style isn't about momentum, it's about tension. You don't pour out your heart. You drip it line by line, withholding just enough to make the other person read it twice. You continue. "Your letter reached me before I expected, though I suspect you knew that." Then you smile, because yes, that's flirtation. That's the good stuff. You drop in a quote from Byron, not because it fits, but because it sounds dangerous. You reference a shared memory, that thunderstorm last spring, a private phrase, the blue ribbon again, and just a touch of complaint, "I miss your counsel." It feels absent at inconvenient hours. That's Victorian for, "Why haven't you written sooner, you magnificent, coward, quirky tidbit?" Some lovers used acrostics in their letters, writing each line so that the first letter of every sentence spelled out a message. It might read, "I miss you," or "Speak soon," or occasionally "Marry me." Subtle, not really, but effective. You consider trying it, then discard the idea. You're above that, probably. Your closing line, "I trust this finds you in continued health and perhaps mischief." You sign with your full name, but no title. Let them wonder what that means. Then comes the wax. Deep red this time. Not romantic, strictly speaking, but classic. You use a rose seal again, but pressed just a little harder. The result slightly cracked at the edges. Beautiful, imperfect, human. You set it aside, watching it cool. And then you think of the bad love letters. Because yes, the Victorians wrote those too. Overwrought declarations, paragraphs of poetic torment, metaphors so tortured they might qualify for compensation. One known example involved a man comparing his beloved's hair to sunlight caught in barley water. Unclear, concerning. Another letter ended with the phrase, "Without you, my soul feels like a shelf in an empty pantry." It did not end well. But perhaps the most famous failed romantic letter came from an anonymous woman who wrote daily to a man she had seen only once from across a church pew. After 3 months, he replied with a single sentence, "Please direct your attention toward God instead." Brutal, iconic, and yet she saved all his replies. You stand and walk to the postbox, letter in hand, heart thumping in a pleasantly theatrical way. The street is dim now. Gas lamps flicker. Horses clop faintly in the distance. The night is thick with expectation and the faint smell of coal smoke. You drop the letter, and then you wait, because that's the final step in the art of Victorian love letters, not sending, not sealing, but waiting, with your heart pressed between paper and wax. You don't notice the letter at first. It's nestled in the pile, modest, quiet. The envelope is a soft gray, its edges darker edged in black. You pick it up. The weight is heavier than it should be. Not because of the paper, but because of what it means. The mourning letter. You run your thumb along the thick border. It's like the paper itself is dressed in grief. A visual code understood without a single word. Black edges meant death. The thicker the border, the closer the loss. A thin band, distant relative. A double-width stripe, a parent, a child, a spouse. Some people even added a second black line across the back flap, just in case the first didn't deliver the full message. You sit quietly. There's no rush with this kind of letter. No anticipation, only stillness. You open it carefully. It is with great sorrow that I inform you. The handwriting is precise, controlled, but the ink wavers just slightly in places, stilled only by force of will. Victorian morning correspondence followed strict rules. Loss, after all, had its own etiquette. And society demanded it be beautiful, even in despair. Mainstream fact, after a death, mourners were expected to send formal notices within days. Dozens, sometimes hundreds. Pre-written templates became popular. Stationers stocked ready-made cards with deepest regret or in loving memory already printed in elegant typeface. Just sign and seal. But the truly thoughtful ones, those were handwritten. A page two, sometimes more. Details of final hours, gentle assurances, quotes from scripture, a pressed sprig of rosemary, or the date of the funeral penned in the bottom right corner, underlined once. You reread the letter again. It's not addressed to you directly. It's from an acquaintance, a courtesy, really. But your chest still tightens, because these letters didn't just announce a death. They demanded participation in mourning. Victorian grief wasn't private. It was performative, yes, but also shared. If someone in your circle was lost, you grieved too. Publicly, elegantly, you rise and open the drawer beneath your writing desk. Inside is your morning stationery. You hope you wouldn't need it, but it's always there. Gray, heavy, lined in black. The ink you'll use is thinner, almost faint, because grief isn't meant to shout. You write slowly. I received your news with deep sadness. Though our acquaintance was brief, her kindness remained vivid in my memory. You pause. Should you add more, historians still argue whether condolence letters were for the living or for the dead. But the best ones did both. They reassured, remembered, and reached gently across the stillness. You finish the note. No flourishes. No unnecessary metaphors. No pressed flowers. That would be inappropriate until the second stage of mourning, after the 4th month at least. Victorians had timetables for grief. One wore black for a year after a parent died, 18 months for a spouse, 9 months for a child. If you were caught laughing too soon or wearing color before your time, social exile, or at least the look from the woman who chaired the local improvement society. Quirky fact, mourning ink was a real product, lighter in shade, thinner in flow. Used exclusively for letters written in the 1st month after loss. It said, "I'm not ready to be bold yet." Some even used watered-down ink on purpose, creating a soft, washed-out script that looked like it wept as it dried. You remember a famous letter from Queen Victoria to one of her daughters? "I am wearing my widow's weeds for his memory. Yet I write to you in hopes my sorrow does not spill into yours." That's the Victorian ideal. Grief made beautiful, contained, but never hidden. You seal your note with black wax, rare somber, reserved only for occasions like this. You press in your seal, not the usual one. A plain stamp this time. No crest, no flourish, just a circle. Closed. You'll hand this one to the postman yourself. It feels wrong to leave it in the tray with the others. And here's the strangest thing. In a culture obsessed with letters, the saddest ones often became the most treasured. People kept condolence letters in velvet pouches, tied them with black ribbon, reread them on anniversaries, passed them down like heirlooms. Not because they were poetic, but because someone took the time to write them, to write through sorrow, to fold it, seal it, and share it. You sit at your desk watching the wax cool and realize your letter is now part of that tradition. Not a message, but a mirror. A whisper of shared silence. You open the next envelope and immediately sense mischief. The handwriting is bolder than necessary. The ink green of all things is the kind of irreverent flourish that says, "This is going to be fun," or at least awkward. You unfold the paper, and there it is, a postcard. One side features a lithograph of Brighton Beach. The other, a message squeezed into every possible inch of space, words marching defiantly around the printed edge. And you know just from the angle of the script and the aggressive flourish on the R that this is from Aunt Prudence. Postcards were the Victorian social media brief public, and often laced with a passive-aggressive zing sharp enough to slice through a lace collar. You read, "Brighton most disagreeable. Weather persistently moist. Met the Beauchamp, who asked after your correspondence. I said nothing. Enclosed recipe for calf's foot jelly. No signature, no need." Mainstream historical fact postcards exploded in popularity after the 1870s. Cheap, fast, and charming, they allowed Victorians to keep in touch with just a few lines, and sometimes far too much honesty. What began as a polite thinking of you quickly evolved into the most polite way to throw shade across county lines. You flip through more. One bears an illustration of a stately manor and reads, "Still not married. Mother is unwell, possibly related." Another shows a goose in a bonnet. The message, "This reminded me of you. Hope you are well." Postcards were the one form of correspondence where brevity invited brazenness. The formality of full letters didn't apply, which meant people wrote things they'd never dare fold into proper stationery. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian families had postcard codes. The placement of a stamp, for instance, could mean, "I love you," "I forgive you," or "Please never write again." Entire guides were published explaining how to tilt, flip, or position the stamp to communicate what words didn't dare say. Whether people actually used these codes or simply enjoyed pretending they did is still up for debate. You sort your stack spotting trends. The older relatives favor full paragraphs and moral lessons. The younger ones, ruthless. One postcard from your cousin Henry simply says, "I won our chess game in 3 moves today." You'd have wept. And another from a friend you haven't seen in years reads, "If you're still avoiding Margaret Good, the woman poisons tea with her silence." Even in a society obsessed with civility, sarcasm finds its way through ink. Postcards were also incredibly public. Anyone handling the mail, postmen, servants, your neighbor with too much time could read every word, which made the not saying of things even more pointed. You remember reading about a woman who mailed her sister-in-law a blank postcard every week for 6 months. No words, just the same image of a cow standing in a storm. Eventually, the sister-in-law relented and apologized, though no one could agree on what for. Historians still argue whether that counts as psychological warfare or avant-garde reconciliation. You take a moment to write one of your own. You select a card depicting a cat in a teacup. Not your style, which makes it perfect. You scribble, "Reminded me of how you drink tea. Feral but charming. Thinking of you always." You sign only with your initials and consider adding a stamp upside down, but decide against it. Let them wonder. The process is quick. No folding, no sealing. Just a few lines and a willingness to live with the consequences. You drop it in the tray and immediately regret the handwriting. It slants too much. The charming looks like chilling. Too late now. That's the Victorian postcard thrill. You release it into the world, and it's already halfway to scandal by the time you put your pen down. One more card catches your eye. Unfamiliar handwriting, no return name. You read. You think you're unreadable, but your letters tell on you. No signature, just a sketch of a single closed eye at the bottom right corner. You stare at it longer than necessary. Then you set it aside. Postcards may have been brief, but their bite lasted, because sometimes the sharpest letters were only 3 sentences long. You spot the next letter by the way it's been folded tight, careful, and oddly smudged. The handwriting is unfamiliar. The paper cheap. The ink faded like it spent time where it shouldn't have. You lift it already, sensing this one didn't travel by way of polite drawing rooms or stationer-curated writing desks. This one smells of tension. You unfold it carefully. The opening line is abrupt, almost jarring. Burn this when you've read it. Welcome to the dark undercurrent of Victorian correspondence. In a world where letters were sacred, some became dangerous, scandalous admissions. Gossip gone nuclear, confessions hastily written after too much port. You're not supposed to have this letter. That much is obvious. You scan further. Mentions of names, locations, allegations about a family in Sussex, a man with debts, a woman, frequently seen at the bookshop, though never reading. There's no signature, just a dash and an initial E. Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, literacy had spread across classes, and with it came a surge in private and often untraceable communication. The Royal Mail, respected and widespread, became the perfect carrier not just of sweet nothings and formal invitations, but of whispers and threats. Your gloved hand might have passed along something explosive without ever knowing. Historians still argue whether the Victorians were uniquely scandal-prone or simply had better documentation. With their compulsive letter writing, they left behind a paper trail long enough to circle the empire. Entire affairs debts, identity swaps, secret births, all revealed decades later in collections of private family papers never meant to see daylight. Quirky detail. There was even an unofficial term for these dangerous notes: second-class sins. Letters too risky to send by regular post, so they were slipped quietly into coat pockets, book spines, or laundry deliveries. A handoff at a ball. A maid who just happened to have an errand. And yes, sometimes bribes to the postman. You glance again at the letter in your hand. The handwriting isn't exactly neat. It's anxious, urgent. Some words are scratched out violently. One corner is torn as if it had been hastily stuffed into a coat. You imagine it being written in poor light. Candle low, hand shaking. A person hovering between confession and cowardice. You read the closing line: "I said I wouldn't write again. This is me failing." There's a pause in your chest you don't expect. You look up out the window. The world is still normal. But this letter, it's not. It's a crack in the veneer. Not every Victorian was poised. Not every correspondence was elegant. Beneath the lace and lavender paper was ink that bled guilt, jealousy, betrayal, and sometimes regret. You rise and pull open your desk's lower drawer, the one for things not meant to be seen. Inside, nestled among old receipts and rejected drafts, is your burn box. Yes, you have one. Most people did. A tin, a wooden case, even a leather pouch, anywhere you could store letters too risky to keep, but too important to destroy immediately. Things that needed aging. You tuck the letter inside and close the lid. It joins a small collection. A letter you wrote but never sent. One you received and never opened. A torn scrap with only a name. Together, they form a paper constellation of nearly said things. Because sometimes Victorian letters weren't meant to endure. They were meant to vanish. Some people burn theirs ritually, every year on the same day. A fireplace, a poker, a cup of tea. Watching the paper curl the ink bubble. And then it's gone. Others hoarded them for decades, until a funeral, or a scandal, or a distant cousin rooting through the attic. You remember the tale of a barrister who stored incriminating love letters in a hollowed-out copy of Pilgrim's Progress. He was nearly caught when a visiting bishop insisted on borrowing it for an afternoon. The bishop read nothing, but found the paper. The case never made it to trial, but the bishop did mysteriously withdraw his application for the deanery. Even sealed letters weren't always safe. Some families made a habit of steaming open envelopes for protective purposes. Inheritance disputes, unwanted engagements, rumors of debts. Letters got read, then carefully resealed. Sometimes with wax so similar you couldn't even tell unless you knew where to look. You returned to your seat, eyeing your own correspondence tray. How many of those letters will one day be found? Will someone read them and know who you were, or who you were pretending to be? That's the shadow side of this whole lovely ritual. Ink is immortal, but intent that fades. And if you're lucky, you'll outlive your worst first drafts. Your eyes drift to the edge of your desk, where a slightly larger envelope rests, a cream-colored rectangle edged in red and blue, its corners a little scuffed from distance and weather. The script across the front is unfamiliar, bold, slightly angular. Underneath your name in darker ink, the words Calcutta via Bombay. Today's one of the Empire letters. You lift it gently. There's a strange weight to these part dust, part power. The paper smells of turmeric and something else. Perhaps the ship that carried it, or the hands that sorted it in a post house far from here. Victorian Britain's postal system didn't stop at Dover. It wrapped itself around the globe like an ambitious vine, sprouting red pillar boxes and black ink across colonies and coasts. You open it slowly. The writing inside is neat, but the lines tilt slightly uphill as though straining toward home. Mainstream historical fact. During the height of the British Empire, mail traveled astonishing distances, often faster than expected. Steamships, trains, and camel couriers formed a web that bound governors to secretaries' officers to wives, traders to London financiers. The post wasn't just a service, it was infrastructure for empire. This letter is from your cousin Arthur, stationed in India, posted near Madras, though he seems to be writing from a brief respite in the north, where the air is less determined to kill me. Classic Arthur. He writes of heat elephants, bureaucratic delays, and a local boy who insists on teaching him how to play an obscure string instrument. You smile at the familiar mix of condescension and awe. He ends, however, more gently than expected. I find myself missing English rain in the strangest way. There's a kind of honesty in its gloom. And just like that, Arthur becomes human again. You realize something as you fold the letter back. These imperial missives carried not just logistics, but longing. Every corner of the British world, from Australia to Zanzibar, was connected through envelopes just like this. Wrapped in routine but stuffed with displacement. Quirky tidbit. Some mail was sent homeward bound via balloon, especially during sieges. The most famous instance, the Siege of Paris, 1870, when letters floated over enemy lines tied to small canvas hot air balloons. One even carried a letter that began, "If this finds you, it means the wind was kind." But for most, it was steamships and sorting stations. The General Post Office in London became a hive buzzing with ink and boots and bags from Bengal, Cairo, Cape Town. Workers sorted by hand. Errors happened, and delays frequent. One family famously received a birth announcement 6 months after the child had died. Another, an invitation to a wedding that arrived 5 days after the divorce. You write a reply to Arthur carefully. You keep it measured, polite. But somewhere in the third paragraph, you let your own homesickness leak out. Not for Empire or India, but for Arthur before he started sounding like a stranger. You write, "I hope the air gives you mercy. I hope your pen stays honest. And I hope you still hum off key when you don't think anyone's listening." You choose gray paper, neutral, less sentimental, but you include a sliver of a dried violet between the pages. He'll know what it means. He always did. You fold the letter, seal it in a sturdier envelope, and mark it via Southampton. Then you pause because this one, unlike most, will travel weeks before it reaches him. There's something poetic in that. The delay, the distance, the act of sending something that might not even matter by the time it arrives. Historians still argue whether these empire letters helped connect hearts or merely lubricated control. Did they humanize distant governors or sanitize power with perfumed prose? You suspect the answer is both. You glance at another imperial letter, this one from Jamaica, written in a rushed, round hand. A woman's script. She writes to her sister describing the garden and the isolation, the ocean that never stops moving. There's a page stained with something rain, maybe, or tears. She ends with, "Tell mother I planted the rosemary. It seems to like the heat more than I do." You fold it carefully. Return it to its sleeve. Empire correspondence was supposed to be official, but it wasn't always. It carried loneliness, hope, mispronounced place names, and bad sketches of wildlife no one believed existed. It carried love across oceans, and sometimes resentment, and often both in the same paragraph. You tuck Arthur's letter into the tray for dispatch, another thread stretching from your desk to a sun-bleached veranda half a world away. Because even Empire needed letters. And sometimes letters were the only thing that made Empire feel almost human. The envelope sits unopened on your writing desk, not out of neglect, but reverence. It's pale ivory, perfectly folded, tied with a faded blue ribbon. You recognize the handwriting instantly, your great-aunt's looping, deliberate style, as if each letter had been practiced in the margins of a hymnal. You received it weeks ago, and didn't open it, because you knew without reading it what it contained the last letter. Victorians loved letters, but they also feared their endings. They believed that when correspondence stopped, relationships did too. No more post, no more memory. So when technology crept into the parlor first as a whisper, then as a buzz, it felt like something sacred had been challenged. You finally untie the ribbon. The letter inside is dated 1905. The paper is still crisp, edges yellowing, but the ink remains intact, iron gall most likely. She writes of her failing eyesight, of how the new telephone has arrived at the neighbor's house, and with it, their ability to shout at a distance, and of how her hands tire more easily now. Mainstream historical fact, by the early 20th century, the telephone was replacing the letter for many day-to-day communications. Telegrams had long offered urgency, but now voices could reach across towns, even cities in real time. No pen, no seal, no time to revise. The result, the beginning of the end of epistolary elegance. Your great-aunt's letter laments that. They say the telephone will make us closer, but it doesn't give me time to think before I speak. It doesn't let me choose my silence. That line lingers. Because that was the beauty of letters, wasn't it? The space between thought and reply. The ability to rewrite before revealing. The luxury of delay. You glance across your desk, stacks of paper ink pots, empty envelopes, and you realize you've been preserving something that the world increasingly no longer requires. Letters. You remember the first time a telephone rang in your house. The confusion, the curiosity, the alarm that a machine was telling you someone else wanted to speak right now. Victorians would have loathed that sense of obligation. So immediate, so unedited. Historians still argue whether the decline of letter writing marked a cultural loss or merely a technological shift. But the truth is, most Victorians didn't adapt. They watched their wax seals gather dust, their ivory paper yellow, their fountain pens dry. Some transitioned. There were attempts to infuse telephone calls with etiquette pauses, formal greetings, farewells. But it never quite worked. You couldn't perfume a phone call, couldn't tie it with ribbon, couldn't reread it on a rainy afternoon with a sigh. Quirky tidbit. In the early days of the telephone, some Victorians wrote scripts before making calls, rehearsing what they'd say as if preparing for theater. Others refused to use it altogether, insisting that conversation without handwriting is simply noise in costume. Your great-aunt's letter continues. She writes of the last family wedding she attended, all telegrams, no toasts. And she mentions with clear disdain the typewriting girl who now transcribes her doctor's letters. No curve in the Y, no flare in the G. I might as well be reading instructions for lamp oil. Then, in her final paragraph, I suppose I write to tell you that this will be my last letter. Not for lack of love, but because my hands have given up. I hope you write to others still, and that they write back, even if only once in a while. She signs simply, With my most enduring affection, Edith. You fold the letter carefully, breath held. Because this isn't just her goodbye, it's a curtain falling on a whole era. One where paper bore witness, where silence was part of the conversation, where even heartbreak could be made beautiful if written on the right stationery. You take one of your best envelopes, you write the date, and you pen one final letter, not to anyone in particular, but to the practice itself. You write thank you. For the pauses, for the time to think, for the freedom to choose my words with care and to hold someone else's with trembling hands. You seal it in blue wax. Press in your oldest seal, a tree with roots. No stamp, no address. You slide it into your drawer. The last letter you'll write not because you have to, but because someone once did. And because even as the world begins to speak faster, you still believe in what's quiet. The archive is quiet. Not library quiet, tomb quiet. Dust hangs in sunlight quiet. You step carefully across wooden floors that creak in all the right places, because of course they do. Everything here creaks with age and meaning, and the weight of memory pressed into pages. You've come to see them, the letters that lived beyond their senders. They're laid out gently in long drawers, with brass handles, each one opened like a treasure chest. You lean over, the first heart skipping a little. The air smells faintly of old paper and lemon polish and time. Inside are folded sheets tied with thin faded string. Labels in delicate script read, letters 1843, 1845, Whitcomb family, Derbyshire. You ease one out with 2 fingers. The paper is thinner than you expect, fragile, like it might sigh into dust if you breathe too hard. But it doesn't. It holds. You unfold it slowly. The ink is still legible. A soft brown, now iron gall, fading to rust. The handwriting loops like a song remembered only in part. The content, a letter from a daughter to her mother, apologizing for leaving her gloves behind. It shouldn't matter. But it does. Because in between the lines is everything unsaid. I trust you remain well. I regret not kissing your hand when I left. A sentence like that makes you stop. Because letters, even the most mundane ones, become different in hindsight. They become mirrors. Not just of who someone was, but who they thought they were, who they hoped they were, and sometimes who they desperately wished someone else would understand. Mainstream historical fact archives across Britain house millions of personal letters from the Victorian era, sorted by name date, sometimes even emotion. Curators read them with gloves, cataloged them with soft voices, and every so often stop halfway through a page just to feel something. You move to the next drawer. Inside are love letters. Dozens, written over a summer in 1871 between 2 men whose relationship, though never openly named, practically glows through the ink. The phrases are coded, but the feeling isn't. You've become a season I wait for. The light seems colder when you're not near. They never married. They never lived together. But these letters, they stayed. And now you read them too. You pause at a collection labeled Anonymous Confessions. Just a few pages. Found tucked into a second-hand copy of Wuthering Heights, sold to a shop in 1890. No names. Just stories. One talks about a stolen brooch, another a child given away. One hauntingly simple reads, I pretended I was someone else in every letter. They love that person, not me. You sit down, because now it hits you. These are the voices that outlasted breath. These are the people whose hearts got archived, not as records, but as remnants, echoes. Truths too inconvenient for dinner conversation, but perfect for paper. Quirky fact. Some Victorian letters were deliberately scented or smoked to preserve them. A few were written on silk so they'd survive longer. One family even embroidered the recipient's name into the letter itself. Emotional permanence wasn't just sentimental, it was a strategy. You move to one final drawer. It's labeled simply, "Letters Never Sent." Your fingers tremble as you lift the top page. It's a note from a woman to her sister full of apology and confession. It was folded, addressed, even sealed, but never posted. You wonder why. Maybe she lost her nerve. Maybe the postman never came. Maybe she read it back and realized it was better to keep it than give it away. Historians still argue whether the letters we find in archives are representative or exceptions. Were they the best, the worst, or just the most survivable, you don't know. But what you do know is this: every single one of them was written by hand. Everyone folded with fingers, stained with breath, touched with intention. And somehow, against all odds, still here. You step away from the drawer and exhale. The art of letter writing may have faded, but its ghosts remain. Not in your inbox, but in linen-lined drawers, in ribbon-bound stacks, in the scent of old ink and something like lavender or longing. You walk out of the archive with your thoughts heavy but not burdened, full, because now you know paper remembers, ink survives, and silence, when folded, sealed, and sent, can still be heard. So here we are. The inkwell dry, the candle low, the paper folded, sealed, and placed softly among the quiet. You've traveled far tonight, not by carriage or train, but by quill, by whispers in envelopes, by glances that never reach their destination except in written form. You've seen hands tremble over signatures, hearts confess on stationery, secrets sealed in wax then slip through brass mail slots into history. And now, it's time to set down your pen. Let your breath slow. Let your mind wander gently, not through worries or to-do lists, but through the afterglow of a gentler kind of connection, where every word was chosen, every pause deliberate, every silence sacred. You rest now in the company of millions of letters, some still unopened, some read until the ink faded, all of them waiting for someone to understand. And tonight, that someone was you. Let that thought hold you as you drift. Let it hum softly in your chest, like the rustle of paper in the quietest dear you. And remember, no matter how far we travel, no matter how quickly the world moves, there is always time to write something down, to fold it with care, and to send your heart gently into the world. Sweet dreams.